A lot of people had a lot of concerns about government services last year. Saskatchewan's ombudsman received more than 4,000 requests for help, and that's up 11% from 2023. Now, those requests involved several areas of government, including social services, corrections, municipalities, and health. Sharon Pratchler is Saskatchewan's ombudsman and public interest disclosure commissioner. She tabled her annual report in the legislature this afternoon. Sharon joins us live in our Regina studio right now. Sharon, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the invitation.
So you received more requests for assistance this year, quite obviously, 11% increase. What did you think of that?
Yeah, it was a lot for my office to handle, but I'm really fortunate because I've got a pretty passionate team of problem solvers who dug in and made sure they were handled in a timely fashion.
Well, let's dig into it. What area of government received the most complaints?
Yeah, the most complaints, the top three, are social services, corrections, and actually local government, municipalities, which made up in total about 66% of our complaints.
Were there any themes there, any examples you can give us specifically? Let's start with social services.
Yeah, it's generally with social services is about a denial of benefits in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it can be about relational fairness, just in terms of did they hear a particular tone when they were dealing with the worker? They didn't hear all the information that was being provided. It's very individualized, the people who are on SED in particular, and so making sure that those individual circumstances are heard and listened to, that's sort of the theme that we hear in that area.
And just give me an idea, Sharon, how do you go through, in this case, 786 complaints? Can you give me an idea how that works case to case?
So like every day in our office, we have an electronic message board where all of the calls are placed on, and that can range from 20 to a high of over 40 calls in a day. And we have 3 to 4 people, depending on volume, handling them. So we triage them, which are high priority. So if somebody's being evicted, somebody's losing their benefits, not going to be able to feed their kids or their grandkids, those all get top priority. I will tend to personally respond to some, especially if there's a loss of a loved one. And so they're triaged in that way. We take their information and then we do whatever research we need to do. If there's a particular fairness issue, we'll talk to the public entity and then try to resolve it in some way. We want to get an early resolution for people because that's better for members of the public if they get to a quick answer. And if we don't have jurisdiction or if we can't help them, we try to tell them that early too, so that they don't sit there waiting for something to happen.
What about corrections?
Corrections, we had an increase in relation to corrections. Last July, I issued a news release indicating we were doing a systemic review of Pine Grove. So we're in the course of that. We haven't finished that yet, so we haven't issued a report on that. And I didn't put detail in our annual report on it because of procedural fairness, since we're in the middle of our review. But we certainly did, and we appreciated the response that we got and the trust that people put in our office in telling us their stories.
Sharon, remind us, we did talk a bit about the 306 for people who don't know. Why is that review happening?
It really was triggered by a decision by myself that it was in the public interest to review conditions at Pine Grove. And since we have started that investigation, there have been no further deaths of women in custody at Pine Grove, so since July of last year.
Great. Okay, municipalities, 589. You mentioned that's related, obviously, to local governments. Is that a little bit more all over the board? Like, what are you hearing about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting area of our jurisdiction. And so it can be anything from potholes and services to bylaw enforcement to too much bylaw enforcement to conflict in terms of code of ethics or conflict of interest or code of conduct in relation to council itself. So we try to do education. And so, for example, just earlier this week, I was at SUMA for 3 days and really understand all the perspectives and talk to people and provide tools for good governance.
I got to ask, we were talking just before we actually went live on air here, is just how do you handle 4,000 of these complaints when it is such a big increase?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for our office this year. And so we, really provided a lot of support to the people that were doing the intake and doing the work. And the members of the public that called in, if sometimes there can be delays when we have that high volume or it takes a little bit longer. We try to call back the same day, but we weren't always able to call back the same day. So we just kind of support each other and ensure that everybody's healthy, because people in our office are listening to people tell distressing stories every day. So we emphasize self-care in our office, and we kind of up that during times like that. But because it's just a really well-functioning team, they were able to do it together.
I'm wondering, obviously every case is different, but how long does it normally take to resolve these issues? I know obviously you'd have those priority ones. You mentioned someone getting evicted from their place. That's an immediate thing. But I wonder, can you talk a bit about how many are just resolved by talking to the complainant, or are there ones that take a really long time to kind of go through all the different agencies?
Yeah, the difference I would say is early resolution versus doing an investigation. So early resolution can include a whole range of things. So if somebody calls our office, some of them won't be in our jurisdiction. They'll be about a federal government program. So we'll refer them to a federal ombudsperson, or we'll refer them to an appeal mechanism, anything we're aware of. So we want to be a pathfinder, because these are taxpayers calling in, and so we want to help them and not just say, well, it's not our jurisdiction. For those that are in our jurisdiction, sometimes there's a misunderstanding of the program, and there's still an appeal mechanism or something they can do within the program, so we'll help them, lead them to that. And then sometimes they just can't resolve the issue themselves, so we will call the public entity. And we're super lucky in Saskatchewan that we have really responsive public entities, so when we call as ombudsman, they will say, what can we do to help resolve it? So they're looking to find a resolution. And so we don't have to do a lot of investigations in our caseload, which, if we did have to, would really make 4,000 complaints unmanageable. But thankfully, we get really good responses from our public entities.
What about responses from government agencies themselves? Overall, do you think the government is improving the way it deals with people?
From my perspective, in terms of when I call people directly, because I am in the trenches and I will call, they're very responsive. There are some really big systems that are hard to steer those ships. And so sometimes it's incremental change, sometimes it's bigger change. But generally, personally, I've seen a real receptiveness to doing education. I've been here 2.5 years, and I've seen that. And among the municipalities, we had 600 to 700 people come to see us at SUMA. So very eager to learn and very eager to talk about the issues they're facing.
It's interesting, Sharon, because often when they might go to you first, but then if they come to us, it's because they aren't getting answers. They're not having any communication maybe with direct government services. What do you think, if anything, needs to change?
I think really conflict resolution skills are key, and de-escalation and hearing the other person, so active listening. So sometimes people think they're good listeners, but actually when you listen to them, they'll interrupt the other person and they'll kind of presume they know where they're going. And silence is really hard for people to do, but sometimes you just have to stay silent and listen to the whole story, and patience, because sometimes it takes a while to get it out. We emphasize trauma-informed practices, which is that you don't know what that person's life experience is. And if they're relating something to you and it's not linear and chronological, that's okay. Just let them say what they have to say, but don't presume you know what they're trying to tell you. That's key.
I feel like you're giving me a bit of a lesson here too as well, Sharon. And it is very accurate and good for us all to consider. We only got about 30 seconds before the debate. What do you want people to know about contacting your office for help? How do they do it?
Yeah, they can go to our website, Ombudsman Saskatchewan. We have our phones are always open, and we return the calls promptly. And we're always happy to hear what they have to say and coach them on any conflict resolution they need to engage in.
Well, thanks for answering our call and for coming into studio today.
Thanks for the invite.